Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to a complete and detailed Ineffa guide. Ineffa is the newest character in version 5.8, who's a strong off-field Electro sub-DPS and shielder who also introduces a new reaction, Lunar-Charged, that we're going to cover in this video. In fact, we're going to cover everything you need to know about Ineffa, her best builds, playstyle, artifacts, weapons, teams, constellations, and much more. Before we begin, however, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, and also keep in mind that a lot of the footage you're seeing was recorded on the creator experience server, which allows me to release this very detailed guide early, so I'm very grateful to have access for that. And I also got provided with a code to share with you guys for 60 Primogems and some XP. With all that out of the way though, let's now talk about Ineffa. Alright, so starting things off, what does Ineffa actually do? Well, firstly, if we're gonna talk about Ineffa, it's first important to talk about the new reaction that she introduces, Lunar-Charged. In fact, through one of Ineffa's passives, Ineffa will introduce this Lunar-Charged reaction by converting any Electro-Charged reaction you do into this Lunar-Charge. What this new reaction does is a little complicated, so I'm gonna break it down for you now. Basically, Lunar-Charge is a reaction somewhat similar to Electro-Charged with a few key differences. Firstly, it will attack a lot slower, having an internal cooldown of 2 seconds per Lunar-Charged reaction instead of 0.5 seconds for Electro-Charged, on top of also having a completely different damage formula. As while Electro-Charge is a reaction scaling with your elemental mastery, Lunar-Charge, however, still has an elemental mastery scaling, albeit a lower one, but also, crucially, is a reaction that can crit. It's a bit similar to Quicken or Aggravate in that regard, and as a transformative reaction, it will not factor in your elemental damage bonus, meaning that running an electro damage bonus goblet will not increase your Lunar-Charge damage. Additionally, something unique about Lunar-Charge is that every character involved in its reaction will contribute to the total reaction damage. In fact, for Electro-Charge, while the character who's triggering the reaction, right, that applies the element last and makes the reaction happen, will be the character whose stats are factored in for the Electro-Charge reaction damage, for Lunar-Charge, it will actually factor in every character involved in the reaction. In fact, in Lunar-Charge's case, every character involved will have their damage calculated and then added up in a unique way. In fact, the character involved in the reaction that will do the most damage will have their damage number added up to whoever also applied an element, like Hydro or Electro in this case, who's part of the reaction as well, and who would have done the second most damage, with their damage being divided in half. The highest damage you do through this reaction plus half of the second most, with the characters that are involved in this reaction. Additionally, if a third character is involved here, their damage will be added up too, but it will be divided by 12, so not a big increase, but worth mentioning, meaning that Lunar-Charge's damage will typically be more consistent to kind of predict or calculate because it factors in multiple characters involved in the reaction and is not just calculated from the stats of one character, which is the case for Electro-Charge. Overall though, while Lunar-Charge as a reaction isn't really the end-all be-all of what makes Ineffa good, in the sense that yes, it's a new reaction, but there are situations where Electro-Charge can actually still be better, namely if you're running a team that's stacking elemental mastery with a dedicated Electro-Charge trigger. If they can reliably spam Electro-Charged, then they could technically do more damage from the Electro-Charge reaction than the Lunar-Charge one because of the fact that it can be triggered a lot faster. Lunar-Charge has a 2-second internal cooldown, whereas Electro-Charge has a 0.5 second one, although in practice it is triggered a bit closer to once every 0.8 or 0.9 seconds, but that's more complicated, so we're not going to get into it. But even then, Electro-Charge is a reaction that is a lot more inconsistent in practice because of the fact that the last person to apply their element will be the one triggering Electro-Charge, meaning that it's not always going to be the same one unit applying it. For Lunar-Charge, on the other hand, the damage is going to be a lot more consistent and regulated because of the way the damage is calculated, factoring in all the units involved in the reaction and not just one. Outside of that, in a lot of more standard teams, right, where you're not just stacking elemental mastery on every unit, because you're already building crit on so many different characters, and Lunar-Charge is a reaction that can crit and therefore scales with it, it will oftentimes be a bigger upgrade to your team, just some nice bonus damage that otherwise would be very minimal with Electro-Charged. This is because in a lot of teams with a strong carry, for example with Nevalette and an Electro character, or even like Chlorinde and a Hydro one, the Electro-Charge damage you'd be dealing would be relatively minimal because you're not really building elemental mastery. But for Lunar-Charge, while the damage still won't be like game breaking, it is a nice bonus in damage that will be very easy to get reliably because of the fact that it scales with crit and factors in every character's damage that is involved in the reaction. And so Lunar-Charge does end up being very nice in a lot of teams, on top of Ineffa's main upside being her personal Lunar-Charge damage, which comes from one of her passive talents that we haven't even gotten into yet. Additionally, something important to mention is that Ineffa also will increase the base damage of Lunar-Charge through this passive talent by 0.7% for every 100 attacks she has, capping out at a 14% increase if she has 2000 attack. This passive talent incentivizes you to build attack, but honestly, 2000 attack is something you'll typically be getting anyways on Ineffa. Alright, now outside of Lunar-Charge, for what Ineffa actually does, now we can talk about her abilities. abilities. Firstly, Ineffa's elemental skill will summon a little robot friend named Brigitte, who will up to once every 2 seconds deal AoE electro damage to nearby opponents. This little robot will teleport to the enemy it's trying to attack, meaning that it's very useful at hitting enemies consistently, applying electro, dealing solid damage, and generating energy. Outside of that, Ineffa's skill will also give you a shield, scaling with Ineffa's attack, as will Brigitte's damage, with this shield being quite strong. It's better than the bad shielders and worse than the best ones, being a bit worse than someone like Lanyan's, but it's still a solid shield, definitely more than good enough to help keep you safe and comfortable. Outside of that, the shield has a great uptime, and so does Brigitte, both having a 20-second duration with only a 16-second cooldown on the skill. Brigitte is somewhat reminiscent of Oz for Fischl in the sense that it will stay even when your Ineffa's off field and will constantly be dealing electro damage throughout your rotation. Oh, and in case you're wondering, contrarily to Fischl's Oz, Ineffa's Brigitte does not snapshot buffs, meaning that its damage will vary based on its real-time stats, and you can't just snapshot all the buffs you would give it when you summon it. Outside of that, Brigitte will also do more damage as thunder clouds created by Lunar-Charged unleashes discharge attacks. This will happen passively as you are lunar charging, and the damage through this extra passive talent is absolutely insane. To clarify, this thundercloud will be dealing lunar charge damage when you would otherwise like electrocharge. When you're mixing electro and hydro, it's the thundercloud that will fire off a discharge, and when this happens, Ineffa's first passive will be triggered. This will typically be the main source of your Ineffa's damage, having Brigitte constantly unleash AoE electro damage that is considered lunar charge damage. Now, this damage will scale with Ineffa's attack, having a scaling of 65%, and while this might look low, in practice it is much higher. In fact, for some reason, the formula for direct lunar charge damage is different and a lot higher than the regular formula, effectively increasing the damage of this passive talent by 300%, multiplying it by 3. Outside of that, because lunar charge is a transformative reaction, it will actually ignore the defense of enemies, once again making it a lot stronger than you'd think. For those reasons, without making this seem too complicated, just know that the lunar charge damage you're going to be dealing through this Ascension passive is just going to be very high, and the main reason as to why Ineffa's damage is really good. So definitely a very important passive, a huge additional source of lunar charge damage. Outside of that, Ineffa also has a burst that will deal a hit of AoE electro damage, having a decently high scaling on a 15-second cooldown with a 60 energy cost. Additionally, it will summon or resummon Brigitte, resetting its duration if it already was there on field. This can be used for certain extended rotations, where you can use Ineffa's burst to reset the duration of your Brigitte, allowing her to last for another 20 seconds. Something nice about this ability also that is very important to highlight is that through Ineffa's second passive, this ability will increase the elemental mastery of both your Ineffa and also your active party member. This EM buff will be equal to 6% of Ineffa's attack and will last for 20 seconds. This buff will typically be honestly very high if you can make use of this elemental mastery, which oftentimes will be the case. In fact, if your Ineffa has 2000 attack, it will be a 120 elemental mastery buff and a bit higher if you have more attack. This buffing your Ineffa will obviously be nice for your lunar charge damage, but also the fact that it buffs your active party member as well will make it great for an on-field carry who might also be triggering reactions. This can be true for lunar charge, but also for other reactions you may be running, like Vaporize, Swirl, or Hyper Bloom. For those reasons, while the exact value of this EM buff will vary based on your team, a lot of the times this elemental mastery buff to 2 characters at the same time will be a very nice bonus for your reaction damage. Lastly, for Ineffa's talent priority, I wanted to start by pointing out that leveling her up as high as possible, ideally to level 90, is going to be recommended to maximize her reaction damage. Outside of that, you can level her elemental skill to give you a bit more damage and also increase your shield strength, which is very nice, followed by your burst for a bit more damage there, and you can ignore your normal attacks. Now, outside of just the conversion from electrocharge to lunar charge, what Ineffa gives you is just a ton of damage that will be considered lunar charge damage because of the fact that lunar charge can crit and the way that the scaling is different for her first passive talent that's considered like direct lunar charge damage. It makes it to where Ineffa as a character is someone who has a lot of personal damage coming primarily from her lunar charge reactions. Outside of that, lunar charge scaling on crit is obviously very nice and can help make your damage consistent and easy to build towards, but all in all, Ineffa's role in a team is to apply electro, give you a strong shield, and deal a ton of damage from off field. All she needs in her team is basically just one hydro character who has decent elemental application. You don't really need to build the rest of your team around her, and provided you fulfill that condition, Ineffa's personal damage will be very nice. Additionally, the elemental mastery buff through her burst is something that I think will be underrated. It's really nice in teams that are triggering more than just one reaction for both your Ineffa and your on-field carry. Outside of that, I want to mention that while Ineffa right now is a strong sub DPS who has some teams where she's a great fit, either a side grade or an upgrade, depending on what exact team you're running, being great in taser teams and also just a solid sub DPS, Ineffa is a character that isn't revolutionary necessary to the current meta, although she is a part of the new best taser teams for a lot of units, but one that I highly suspect will get better in the coming patches. Now, while a lot of this is speculative, so you may want to wait and see what we get in future patches, I first want to say that with a character being released right before a new region, Nodcry, it is extremely likely, as we'll talk about in the next section when we cover how to build Ineffa's artifacts, that she will be getting a new artifact set in the coming version that may increase either her personal damage or her supportive capabilities. Outside of that, similarly to, I'd say, Emily with Kaniche, it is highly likely that Ineffa is a character who has at least one or multiple teams that she's designed for, notably through the Lunar-Charged reaction, that will come out in future versions in Nodcry. While obviously this is really hard to tell, and with Emily and Kaniche's case, Kaniche isn't a character who needs Emily, she's just nice in his teams, she's great, but not someone Kaniche is dependent on. It's hard to tell exactly where Ineffa will be for future characters' teams, but I do want to highlight that there probably will at least be a synergy with Ineffa and a future Lunar-Charged character. As of right now, we've seen that Flynn's is Electro through the official trailer, so there might be some synergy there, but once again, it's far too early to tell. I'm just trying to give you guys some early thoughts, as many signs point towards Ineffa having synergy with future characters. Outside of that, Ineffa is a character whose vertical investment, namely her signature weapon and first constellation, will both increase Lunar-Charged reaction damage, so again, something that may be more relevant in the future, but only time will tell. If you like Ineffa, she can be great already in existing teams as a strong sub DPS and shielder. Ineffa genuinely is really strong though, and can be the part of one of Nevalette's best teams, and a lot of the current Electrocharge's best teams being an upgrade for someone like Aoife or a lot of other characters. So again, I want to highlight that even right now, she's really strong. Not someone who breaks the game, but if you like the teams she's played in, like Electrocharge or Lunar-Charge, or like Ineffa herself, she is already a very powerful sub DPS with great personal damage. Again, she's not someone you should feel forced to get, so try to avoid any FOMO there, because rerun banners exist, but she's a good character, and as a 5-star before a new region, I'm sure a lot's gonna change, and she'll very likely get future characters that she synergizes with. Also, and I'm adding this later, I do want to point out that this current Spiral Abyss rotation is kind of uniquely terrible for Ineffa, which means that she'll feel a lot worse in practice for this rotation than she will on average and likely in the next one. This is because the first half has the automaton that wants cryo in your team, and the second half, while it is more bearable, does want you to have some way to break cryo shields, like notably running pyro, a good amount of electro, or Sitlali/Auroron. And so for those reasons, while you can definitely still have viable Ineffa teams there, and as you'll see through the footage in this video and the showcase at the end, and she can still be great, just know that in practice right now, there isn't really the best place to show her off or test her because of the nature of the current Abyss that even will buff the damage of some other types, like Night Soul for second half and cryo damage for first half, and make Ineffa feel a lot worse than she actually is. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's talk about how to actually build your Ineffa. Now, starting with the artifact sets, I actually want to mention something very important here. Because Ineffa is a character that came out right before a new region, Nodcry, it is incredibly likely that Ineffa will be getting a new artifact set in version 6.0 that will help her either deal more damage or better support her team. For those reasons, while we'll talk about the best artifact sets to use on Ineffa right now, once 6.0 comes out, she will very likely switch to whatever the new set for her is, as right now there is not a set tailor-made for her or Nodcry characters. And so with that said, while right now she doesn't have anything too amazing to increase her damage, her best sets are the following. Firstly, Tenacity of the Millith 4-piece will be her general go-to supportive set if you have attack scaling characters on your team. This is because she'll have good uptime on the 4-piece that will increase her shield strength and also give her entire party 20% attack, which is a nice amount of stats that multiple characters on your team can make use of. Because of this, it's the general recommended set for now, and if you do want to maximize her personal damage, then 4-piece Gilded Dreams will be the best for the elemental mastery and attack that it gives you. I also wanted to add that in Hyperbloom teams, Gilded Dreams giving you a lot of elemental mastery will make it even more valuable. Outside of that, if you don't have Gilded Dreams, mix and matching 2-piece sets of either elemental mastery or attack percent 2-pieces, either 2 of one or 1 of each, are only a little bit worse and are viable as well. Outside of that, 4-piece Thundering Fury is viable too, and technically Golden Troop, although the skill damage will not affect your Lunar-Charge, which is a big chunk of your kit, so it's fine but less recommended. Overall, as I said though, there's a very high chance that you will be farming for the new 6.0 artifact sets and using one of them on Ineffa once we find out what they do, which I will update in a pinned comment once it's out. For now though, the 2 sets I can recommend are either Tenacity of the Millith as your go-to supportive choice, or 4-piece Gilded Dreams as your best for your personal damage. Mix and matching 2 pieces is fine too, as a placeholder until 6.0. Alright, now next up for the stats you want on Ineffa, here there really is a lot that you can do. In fact, Ineffa is a character who, as we saw, will do a lot of damage through the Lunar-Charged reaction. Because of this and the fact that this reaction can can crit, going for stats such as crit rate and crit damage, as well as attack percent, will help benefit the damage from her skill, burst, and also her first ascension passive, which will be your main source of Lunar-Charged damage from Ineffa. Attack percent is also nice to increase her shield strength and her elemental mastery buff. Outside of that, elemental mastery also affects Lunar-Charge and increases its damage, so it's also a good stat to look for Ineffa. Crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and EM are all great at increasing her offenses, with energy recharge also being important in order to use your burst as often as possible. Now, how much ER you need and whether or not you should build it will depend based on your team and playstyle, but for the most part, I do want to say that Ineffa's burst is generally worth using. This is because while its damage is okay, the elemental mastery buff you're gaining through your 4th ascension passive that will increase both your Ineffa's elemental mastery and also your active party members' elemental mastery will oftentimes be more than enough to make using your burst worthwhile. Now, while the exact value of elemental mastery will vary based on your team, generally for Ineffa herself, you'll roughly break even if you have to build some energy in order to use your burst because of the elemental mastery buff that she will give herself. With that said, where it really does gain value is if you're also running a carry who's triggering reactions such as Hyper Bloom or Vaporize, or even Swirl with an Anemo character. Having someone else in your team that can make use of this big elemental mastery buff, which oftentimes will be the case. Because of this, I think using Ineffa's burst is generally going to be worth it. Now, how much energy recharge you need will vary, and in a double Electro team, because of the Electro Resonance, Ineffa will not need a lot of energy recharge at all, and you can get your burst back very easily. She will either need no energy recharge with a very efficient battery such as Raiden or even Fischl, or just a little bit with other Electro characters, usually ranging from 130 to 160. In a solo Electro team, while bursting every other rotation can be viable, although once again, the elemental mastery buff is oftentimes worthwhile. If you want to burst every rotation, you can need a lot of energy recharge, like around 170 to 200 plus. Now, with that said, in a solo Electro team, a lot of the times there are ways to make your energy recharge requirements a lot lower in practice than they are on paper. This is by either running energy generating weapons like Favonius supports, or Katane Crossbeer on your Ineffa, or even modifying your rotation so that your Ineffa herself can catch some particles from your support characters. This isn't something you absolutely need to do, but it can help you get your burst back a lot easier in teams where she's more starved for energy. Generally speaking though, in double Electro teams, she won't need that much energy recharge, and if you need too much, bursting every other rotation, as I said, is viable in teams where your on-field carry doesn't need the elemental mastery buff. And so once you have enough energy recharge, the rest that you're looking for is just the generic offensive stats that we mentioned, being crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and elemental mastery. These will be great substats on all of your pieces. Now, for Ineffa's main stats, what you want is quite flexible, but also pretty straightforward. In fact, for your circlet, crit rate or crit damage will be the best at increasing your damage. Now, for your Sands and Goblet, generally attack percent is going to be the standard, because not only is it good for Ineffa's personal damage, but it will also be converted into elemental mastery through her 4th ascension passive, and will also help you get a stronger shield because your shield scales on attack. For those reasons, attack Sands and attack Goblet will be the standard and your general recommended best in slot overall. With that said, elemental mastery on either your Sands or Goblet will typically be relatively similar in power level, and a viable option as well depending on your substats. So you can very easily mix and match an attack piece and an elemental mastery piece as your Sands and Goblet options for Ineffa. With that said, in a Hyperbloom team where Ineffa's elemental mastery will matter even more, then you can consider going for elemental mastery on both your Sands and Goblet, as it will become more desirable. Additionally, if your Ineffa doesn't have enough energy recharge through her substats and weapon, then an energy recharge Sands can be viable as well if you need it to get your burst back. Additionally, in case you're wondering, an electro damage bonus Goblet is not recommended on Ineffa because her Lunar-Charged damage, including all the damage you're getting from your 1st ascension passive, will not scale with electro damage bonus, making it a lot worse than you might expect. For those reasons, building Ineffa is pretty straightforward, attack percent being the standard on both your Sands and Goblet, with elemental mastery being viable as well, and going for crit on your circlet. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's talk about Ineffa's best weapons. So firstly, I want to start by saying that Ineffa is a character with a lot of good weapon options, including some great 4-star and free-to-play choices, meaning that she has a good weapon for every type of player. Firstly, her best in slot will naturally be her signature weapon, Fractured Halo. This is a weapon that will give her a lot of stats, namely 66 crit damage, as well as a 40% damage increase to all of your party members' Lunar-Charged damage as you create a shield. And so what this means in practice is that for now, this will just be a good increase in damage to your Ineffa and your Lunar-Charge. It will typically be around 30 or so % better than your 4-star options, being Ineffa's best in slot choice. Keep in mind that Ineffa is a character who will be played alongside other strong damage dealers, which means that while increasing her personal damage is definitely good because she is strong, it's not the only thing that matters. With that said, it is highly likely, as I mentioned, that future Lunar-Charged damage dealers come out with Nodcry, or at least one. And if that's the case, and that's a character you run alongside Ineffa, then this weapon will gain more value as it increases all of your Lunar-Charged damage. For those reasons, I can see this weapon gaining more value as future characters are released, but do keep in mind that this is purely speculation as of right now. I just think it is likely and worth mentioning, but we will have to wait and see. If you don't have her weapon, however, fear not, as it's not needed, because Ineffa does have some good alternative options. In fact, if you don't have her signature, other good options include many 5-star stat sticks, like Staff of Scarlet Sands, Calamity Queller, Lumbadus, Homa, or even Jade Spear. Do note that with Staff of Scarlet Sands, Elemental Master on your Sands and Goblet can give you more value, as this weapon will give you some attack based on your EM. Symphonist of Sense technically works, although it'd be better used on a healer, and Energy Recharge 5-stars like Skyward Spine or even Engulfing can work too. Outside of that, Ineffa also has some great offensive 4-star polearms, like both of the Battle Pass ones, namely Ballad of the Fjords and Deathmatch. Both of these options are strong, with Ballad of the Fjord typically being slightly better. These weapons are both great at R1 and get better at R5, with a fully refined Ballad being even better than a lot of the 5-star weapons outside of her signature. Outside of that, Ineffa has some great free-to-play 4-star stat sticks as well, like notably the Kitane Crossbeer, which gives her a high base attack, elemental mastery on the stat line, and then some elemental skill damage as well as an energy generating passive through the weapon's effect. For those reasons, Kitane Crossbeer is a great free-to-play stat stick, and if you don't need the energy that it gives you, then you can go for an event weapon like Missive Windspear. Also worth pointing out that the Torch event weapon is viable too, but not quite as strong as the other weapons I mentioned. Last but certainly not least, Ineffa has a great supportive option she can use if you want more energy for her and your team. This weapon is obviously the Favonius Lance, and while it won't give your Ineffa the highest personal damage possible, the high base attack and good energy recharge stat line, as well as a passive that will give her and your entire team more energy, makes this weapon a great supportive stat stick, trading a bit of Ineffa's personal damage off for more energy for your entire team, being nice for her supportive capabilities. For those reasons, its exact value will vary, but it's generally one of your best options. With that said, I will now put a weapon ranking on screen to help give you guys a rough idea of what to expect with each weapon and how good they are compared to one another. Now, keep in mind as always that the exact ranking will vary heavily based on your artifacts, stats, teams, and what you're doing, so use this only for a general idea. I do want to reiterate one last time that her signature weapon, which gives you Lunar Charge buffs, can be better with future characters, and also the Favonius Lance is a lot better than it seems, because obviously it won't be the best for her personal damage, but giving more energy to your team and allowing them to build more damage or get their burst back faster can make it a lot better and a really strong supportive option. Overall though, Ineffa does have a ton of great weapon options, a good signature, although you shouldn't feel forced to get it, as well as other great 5-star stat sticks you may have, good battle pass options, and even great free-to-play 4-star weapons. Alright, now moving on for Ineffa's constellations, here's what you need to know. Firstly, Ineffa's first constellation is one that will give your team effectively a free 50% damage bonus to all of your Lunar Charge damage. This will activate as Ineffa activates her shield barrier, and it will increase your Lunar Charge damage by 2.5% for every 100 attack Ineffa has, which means that at 2000 attack, you will cap it out at the 50% Lunar Charge damage increase that I mentioned. Because of this and the fact that Ineffa typically will be building at least 2000 attack anyways, this will generally just be a free increase to your Lunar Charge damage, typically being around a 25% or so damage increase right now. But once again, this constellation increasing your Lunar Charge damage will probably be more valuable, similarly to her signature weapon, if they release a future Lunar Charge carry in Nodcry. If that's the case, both this constellation and her weapon increasing your Lunar Charge damage can be a bigger team damage increase. As of right now though, it's still a pretty good constellation. Next up, for Ineffa's second constellation, this is another pretty good one that will give Ineffa another instance of AoE electro damage equal to 300% of her attack. That's also, importantly, considered Lunar Charge damage. This will happen shortly after Ineffa uses her burst, as well as also giving her burst the ability to give you a shield, meaning that you can get it from your burst and not only from your skill. On top of that, it also helps in co-op, but for the most part, it's a nice increase in damage that is typically also around a 25% personal damage increase. Moving on, Ineffa's C3 and 5 increase her talent levels, which really aren't the biggest deal, and then her C4 will help alleviate her energy recharge needs by giving her 5 elemental energy up to once every 4 seconds as you trigger Lunar Charge reactions. This ends up being a lot of energy in a rotation and really helps you get your burst back without needing much energy recharge. Lastly, for Ineffa's C6, this will just be a lot more damage, doing another instance of AoE electro damage equal to 135% of her attack, once again being considered Lunar Charge damage and being triggered up to once every 3.5 seconds. This will happen as her C1 is active, which is basically always, and once again, it's a constellation that focuses on increasing the Lunar Charge damage that Ineffa will be dealing. Overall, Ineffa is a character with good constellations, with both her C1 and C2 increasing her personal damage by quite a bit. With that said, it's worth pointing pointing out and highlighting that her first constellation in particular, and also her signature weapon, are the two upgrades that not only benefit her, but also benefit your team's overall lunar charge damage, giving it more synergy with potential future characters. With that said, do not feel forced or pressured to get any constellations or upgrades, as Ineffa is a solid character even at C0, but once again, she does have some pretty good early stopping points if you want to go further. Oh, and if you were wondering, personally, I'm keeping my Ineffa C0. The 6 unactivated constellations you're seeing here are just because I'm recording this on the creator experience server and not my main account. All right, now with all that out of the way, let's talk about Ineffa's best teams and synergies. Firstly, it's important to point out that while Ineffa is a character who's revolving around her unique lunar charge reaction, she doesn't need for her full team to be revolving around that. In fact, while obviously you want at least one hydro character in your team to constantly trigger electro charge and therefore lunar charge, while you can run a second hydro or a second electro or even both and still have a good team, that's not a requirement with Ineffa because of the fact that adding a third lunar charge trigger in your team will have their lunar charge damage divided by 12, as we saw in the lunar charge formula earlier. For those reasons, while taser teams or lunar charge focused teams are definitely still really strong, the way you're actually building your team and the elements you can use are a lot more varied than you might expect, and you basically only just need at least one hydro character with Ineffa. Outside of that, I also wanted to point out once again that Ineffa is definitely someone whose teams, while they are definitely much more versatile than you might expect, will expand even further with future Nodcry characters. With that said, for now, Ineffa does have a lot of teams and is a very strong off-field sub DPS. In fact, Ineffa can be ran in taser teams paired with another hydro character and then 2 flex slots. In these teams, you can have an Anemo driver like Aoife, Sucrose, or Mizuki, or even characters like Wander or Hazo. These teams are pretty straightforward, and these teams definitely appreciate Ineffa a lot for the damage she gives you and also the comfort of a shield. I do want to say that these taser teams with Anemo drivers do benefit greatly from Ineffa's release, and I'm personally very happy for Aoife, who definitely is better if you have Ineffa, as Ineffa slots into his existing electro charge focused teams that I guess are now lunar charged very nicely and will increase your DPS. Teams like these have a lot of flexibility, and you don't actually need an Anemo on fielder. You can even use a character of another element. You can have a Hydra on fielder like Kokomi or Ayato or even Child, or you can quick swap through a bunch of strong support characters and even maybe spend a bit of time on one of your sub DPSs like Yelan. You can even use Neuvillette as an on-fielder. Ineffa can be a nice addition to a Neuvillette team, alongside, for example, Farina and then a buffing support. And these teams are another one of Neuvillette's very many really powerful teams. Early math shows that this can potentially be Neuvillette's best team even, especially when you factor in Ineffa's shield, which is very valuable for a C0 Neuvillette, and overall just being another great premium Neuvillette team. Obviously, I want to point out that in a team like this one, your Neuvillette's personal damage won't be as high as a hyper carry team, but your team's overall damage will be very high because of the fact that Ineffa also does good damage. Outside of that, Ineffa can also be played alongside electro carries, giving them another great team option, being the best for their electro charge variations, with these carries oftentimes having different teams as well, so basically just another good option. She can be ran alongside any strong electro on fielder like Raiden, Sino, Clorind, Varessa, or Yai Miko. Do note that Ineffa here will be a nice upgrade to a lot of these electro carries as taser teams, giving them another strong way to be played. Keep in mind that Ineffa won't necessarily replace or be better than someone like Yansan for Varessa or a Chevreuse Overload team for a lot of these electro carries, but once again, it's another strong team archetype that Ineffa helps enable. With Varessa, for example, she'll be an alternative if you want to play with Lunar Charge, and with other electro carries, you can get some surprisingly solid team options like with Raiden, Clorind, or once again with Sino in more of a quick loom variation, which we'll touch on later. Outside of that, you can also play Ineffa in soup teams where you run a bunch of different reactions together, usually adding a pyro character to a taser team, with these slots here being once again very flexible. Ineffa can also be ran alongside Chaska as a viable option, provided you have Hydra there too to trigger Lunar-Charged. I did want to mention also that with Chaska, you can run her on her standard DPS Obsidian Codex set, but you can also run her on Verdescent Venerer to help swirl different elements, which works as well and can sometimes be better. Ineffa also works in a Hyperbloom team where she'll trigger both Lunar Charge and Hyperbloom, doing great damage that will scale with her Elemental Mastery, on top of also just having good damage from your other characters. In a team like this, you want to make sure you have enough Hydra applications, and you can run an on-fielder in basically any of these roles. In a team like this one, you can use your Nahida on field, but you can even add Alhaitham here, and then with your last slot, either make the team a bit more focused on either Quicken with a bit of Hyperbloom or Hyperbloom with a bit of Quicken, depending on what element you choose for your last slot of either Dendro, Hydro, or Electro. Personally, I've had a lot of fun and success with both Sino and Alhaitham teams, two of my favorite characters where I get to use Ineffa now as a shielder and do a mix of Lunar Charged, Quicken, and Hyperbloom, depending on my elemental application of each element, with there being a few viable team combinations combinations for these characters that, once again, I actually find quite enjoyable. Outside of that, Ineffa can also be played in over vape teams, so a team will be triggering Vaporize, Overload, and also Lunar-Charged. Provided you have a fast Hydro Applier, a Pyro Carry, and Ineffa, you can just slot her in there and she'll do good off-field damage. This works with Arlecchino, but it also works with various other Pyro Carries like Yumiya, Hutao, Mawika, or others. You can even play Ineffa as your on-fielder with just other good off-field supports to stay inside of Bennett's buff and maximize your Brigitte's damage, on top of being able to quick swap around. Now, obviously in this section, I can't cover literally every team Ineffa has because, again, she is very versatile and very strong, provided you just have a good Hydro character there with her. Having something like a Yelan Ineffa sub DPS duo that can fit with almost any team and almost any reaction. I also wanted to mention somewhere in this video that as a flex slot in Lunar-Charged teams, Sucrose is actually a surprisingly strong option because of the fact that she'll give Elemental Mastery to your entire party through her passive, on top of the obvious Verdescent Venerer set. So while there are a ton of great flex options in many teams, I did want to point out Sucrose as a strong 4-star for Lunar-Charged teams, given the value of buffing all of your team. Other things I thought I should mention are that you can technically play her in a Navia team, although you'd be losing out on Bennett, but it can work. And you can even play her in teams where she has less synergy, but the shield is appreciated, like a Chevreuse Overload team, if your carry is someone who really wants a shielder, where Ineffa can stack Elemental Mastery, run the Millith set, and do fine, although that's obviously not what she's designed around as a Lunar-Charged support. Alright, now with that said, we're now going to get into a showcase of my Ineffa in the current Spiral Abyss. This is going to be footage from my main account on the live server. I'm using the Deathmatch weapon, although I do have better options. I think it's a good middle ground weapon to use. My Ineffa is level 90, my talents are 9-8, and I am obviously C0. Now with that said, for my artifact build, it's going to vary between Gilded Dreams and Millith. My Gilded Dreams ratio is 87-14 with 162 ER, a decent amount of attack and EM, but keep in mind that my exact ratio will vary a bit when I go to Millith, in a team where I'm more supportive, like with Arlecchino, whereas this is my ratio on Gilded. Also, the exact energy recharge I need will vary from team to team, but this is the amount I'm on now. So again, exact stats may vary, but yeah, C0, Deathmatch, and either Gilded Dreams or Millith if I'm playing with an attack scaling carry. With that said, I hope you enjoyed the guide and I hope you'll enjoy the showcase. Let's go. And so yeah, overall Ineffa is a very strong character that, once again, we're gonna have to wait and see how she fares in Nodcry, but even right now she's great for shielding and doing damage, and I hope in this guide I gave you everything you need to know about Ineffa. If there's something I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment because she is a new character. Stay tuned for a ton of upcoming guides, reviews, and also some more cinematic videos that I'm trying to work on, so subscribe if you haven't already. With that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.